Police interviews are a cornerstone of criminal investigations. They're basically conversations held between law enforcement officers and individuals who might have information about a crime. These talks can happen in lots of different places, but more often than not they take place in a small plain room inside a police station. The room itself is really designed to be simple, with very few distractions. Usually there's just a table, a few chairs, and well, nothing else. This is all done on purpose. The idea is to make the person being interviewed focus only on the detective and their questions. It's a controlled environment where every word, every pause, and even every look can be recorded and analysed later. These interviews, they're not just casual chats, they're strategic tools used to gather facts, find leads, and sometimes to get a confession. The people being interviewed could be witnesses, victims, or suspects. A witness might have seen something important. A victim is the person who was harmed. And a suspect is someone the police believe might have been involved in the crime. The police want to know what happened, who was involved, and why. They ask questions to piece together a story, almost like putting together a puzzle. The interview is their way of finding the missing pieces. They might even ask the same question in different ways to see if the answers stay the same. They're looking for consistency, but they're also watching for nervousness, hesitation, or any sign that someone isn't telling the whole truth. It's a high-stakes conversation that can honestly change the course of an investigation and someone's life. The atmosphere in an interview room is often filled with tension. Even if you've done nothing wrong, sitting across from a trained detective can be intimidating. The power dynamic is, well, pretty clear. The detective is in control. They know the law, they know the procedures, and they've got a specific goal in mind. The person being questioned is on unfamiliar ground. They might feel pressure to talk, to cooperate, to say something, anything to make the situation go away. This pressure is a key part of the process. Detectives are trained to use this psychological environment to their advantage. They want to make the person feel comfortable enough to talk, but also stressed enough to reveal information they might otherwise keep to themselves. Understanding how these interviews work is really important for every citizen. It's not something you only see in movies or on television shows. It's a real part of our justice system. The words spoken inside those four walls carry immense weight. They can be used to build a case against someone, to clear a person's name, or to uncover a larger criminal operation. The interview is a search for the truth, but it's a search conducted through a very specific and often intense method. Everyone should know what to expect if they ever find themselves in that room, because what you say and what you choose not to say can have consequences that last a lifetime. On September 3rd, 2020, a man named Benjamin Conley found himself sitting in one of those interview rooms. He was in police custody, which means he wasn't free to leave. But at the start of the interview, the detective told him something interesting.
Benjamin, you're not under arrest.
This can be a confusing situation for a lot of people. If you're at a police station and can't just walk out the door, it certainly feels like you're arrested. This is actually a common technique used by law enforcement. By telling someone they're not under arrest, the detective tries to lower their defenses. It makes the situation seem less serious than it actually is. The person might feel more relaxed and, more willing to talk. The distinction between being in custody and being under arrest can be a really fine line. Being in custody means you're deprived of your freedom in a significant way. You can't just get up and go home. An arrest is a more formal step, where you're officially charged with a crime. The detective wanted Benjamin to feel like he was just there to help with an investigation. He wanted Benjamin to see him not as an adversary, but as someone who was on his side. This approach is all about building a sense of trust, even if it's a false one. The detective was setting the stage, creating an environment where Benjamin might feel safe enough to share information he would normally protect. Despite telling Benjamin he was not under arrest, the detective did something very important next.
Benjamin, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you.
This action showed that the police understood the seriousness of the situation, even if they were downplaying it with their words. Reading the rights is a legal requirement when someone is in custody and is about to be questioned. It signals that anything Benjamin said from that point forward could be used against him in a court of law. This is a critical moment in any police interview. It's the point where the informal chat becomes a formal interrogation with real legal consequences. The detective was following the rules, but he was also playing a psychological game. For Benjamin, this must have been a very confusing mix of signals. On one hand, he was being told not to worry, that he was not under arrest. On the other hand, he was being read a list of rights that are famous for being associated with arrests on TV shows. He was being pulled in two different directions. One message said, "Relax, this is just a conversation." The other message said, "Warning, anything you say can and will be used against you." This kind of planned confusion is designed to keep a person off balance. It makes it harder for them to think clearly about their situation and the best way to handle it. The Miranda rights, or Miranda warning, are a set of protections for people being questioned by the police. They come from a famous court case, and now they're a standard part of police procedure in the United States. The rights are simple, but honestly pretty powerful. First, you have the right to remain silent. This means you don't have to answer any questions. You can choose not to speak at all. Second, anything you do say can be used against you in a court of law. This is a warning that your words have serious consequences. The police aren't just making conversation, they're collecting evidence. Every word you utter can become a brick in the wall of a case against you. The warning continues with two more vital rights. You have the right to an attorney, which means you can have a lawyer with you during the questioning. This is incredibly important because a lawyer understands the law and the interview process. A lawyer can advise you on what to say and what not to say. They can protect you from tricky questions or from making a mistake that could harm you later. Finally, if you can't afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you at no cost. This ensures that everyone, regardless of their financial situation, has access to legal help. These rights work together as a shield, designed to protect a citizen from the power of the government during an interrogation. Police are required to read these rights to a person who's in custody before they begin questioning them. This isn't just a suggestion, it's a constitutional requirement. If they fail to do so, any confession or information obtained during the interview might not be allowed in court. This rule exists to make sure that any statement a person makes is voluntary. It ensures that the person knows they have choices and isn't being forced or tricked into confessing. The Miranda warning is a safeguard against coercion. It's a reminder that even when you're in a police station surrounded by authority, you still have fundamental rights that must be respected by law enforcement. When the detective read Benjamin Conley his rights, he was following this important procedure. He was acknowledging that Benjamin was in a custodial setting and that the interrogation was about to begin. For Benjamin, hearing those familiar words, "You have the right to remain silent," should have been a clear signal. It was a moment where he had a choice. He could have stopped the interview right there and asked for a lawyer. He could have chosen to say nothing at all. But, like a lot of people in that stressful situation, the full meaning and power of those rights can be hard to grasp when you're scared, confused, and being told that everything will be okay if you just cooperate. During the interview, the detective used a very powerful tool of persuasion. He made promises to Benjamin.
Benjamin, if you're honest with me and cooperate, you'll get to go home tonight, I promise. You won't be charged with any crime.
This is a tactic that's often used in interrogation rooms. The detective presents himself as someone who has the power to decide the person's fate. He creates a simple choice: cooperate and be free, or stay silent and face serious trouble. For someone like Benjamin, who was scared and just wanted the situation to end, the promise of going home was incredibly tempting.
And listen, Benjamin, your cooperation will be our little secret. Your name won't show up in any police reports or paperwork.
This promise was designed to address another one of Benjamin's fears. People involved in criminal activity are often afraid of being seen as a snitch or an informant. They worry about what might happen to them or their families if others find out they talk to the police. By promising confidentiality, the detective was trying to remove that fear. He was making it seem like Benjamin could help the police without any negative consequences from his own world. These kinds of promises can be very effective, but they're also very dangerous for the person being interviewed. Detectives in many places are legally allowed to lie during an interrogation. They can make promises they have no intention of keeping. The detective's main job is to get information, and they can use deception to achieve that goal. The promise of going home is one of the most common and powerful forms of this deception. The detective doesn't usually have the final say on who gets charged with a crime. That decision is up to the prosecutor's office. The detective can make a recommendation, but he can't guarantee an outcome. Benjamin was put in a difficult position. He had to decide whether to trust the detective. He had to weigh the promise of immediate freedom against the risk of talking. The detective was painting a picture of an easy way out. All Benjamin had to do was answer a few questions honestly, and his nightmare would be over. He could walk out the door and go back to his life. This offer can create immense pressure. It makes the right to remain silent seem like a bad choice. It frames cooperation not just as the right thing to do, but as the only smart thing to do. It's a carefully crafted trap for the anxious mind. The environment of the interrogation room had a clear effect on Benjamin Conley. Throughout the interview, he showed signs of extreme fear and confusion. Being in police custody is, well, a stressful experience for anyone. The loss of freedom, the uncertainty of what will happen next, and, the intense questioning can create a powerful sense of anxiety.
I'm scared.
This was not an act. It was a genuine reaction to the immense pressure he was under. His fear was so overwhelming that at one point he could not even remember his own home address. A simple piece of information that most people can recall without thinking. This state of fear and confusion is exactly what detectives can sometimes exploit. When a person is scared, they are not thinking logically. Their ability to make calm, rational decisions is impaired. They are more likely to focus on short-term relief rather than long-term consequences.
If you just tell the truth, everything will be all right. Don't worry, Benjamin.
The detective's promise to let him go home was a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. In his panicked state, Benjamin was likely focused on that single promise. He wanted to believe the detective. He wanted to believe that there was a simple path out of the room and back to his normal life. His fear made him vulnerable to the detective's suggestions and promises. The detective, in turn, tried to manage Benjamin's fear. He would offer words of reassurance, telling him not to worry and that everything would be all right if he just told the truth. This can seem like a kind gesture, but it is also a strategic move. The detective needed Benjamin to be calm enough to provide clear, detailed information. If Benjamin was too panicked to speak, the interview would be useless. So the detective would alternate between applying pressure and offering comfort. It was a way of keeping Benjamin on the hook, scared enough to feel he had to cooperate, but calm enough to give the answers the detective was looking for. This emotional roller coaster is honestly exhausting. Imagine being terrified, then being told everything is fine, then being asked a difficult question that brings the fear rushing back. This cycle can wear a person down. It breaks down their mental defenses. For Benjamin, the desire to escape this emotional turmoil was likely a huge factor in his decision to talk. He was not just answering questions about a crime, he was trying to find a way to make the fear stop. He was trapped in a web of his own anxiety, and the detective was the spider at the center, patiently waiting for him to make a mistake.
Okay, I'll talk. I sold cocaine to Christopher Vale. I did it about once a month. Sometimes it was half a kilo, sometimes a full kilo. A full kilo cost $35,000. On the day you picked me up, I fronted the drugs to Chris. He was supposed to pay me later.
Under the weight of his fear and the allure of the detective's promises, Benjamin Conley began to talk. He made a series of admissions that would have a profound impact on his future. He confessed to supplying another man, Christopher Vale, with cocaine. This was the key piece of information the detective was looking for. Once those words were spoken, they could not be taken back. A verbal confession, especially one that is recorded, is powerful evidence. Benjamin had crossed a line. He went from being someone the police were questioning to someone who had admitted to committing a serious felony. His own words became the strongest evidence against him. Benjamin did not just give a simple yes or no. The detective pushed for details, and Benjamin provided them. He explained that he sold drugs to Christopher Vale about once a month. He talked about the quantities involved, which were not small. Sometimes he would sell a half kilo, and other times a full kilo of cocaine. These details were important for the police. They showed that this was not a one-time mistake, but an ongoing criminal enterprise. The details added credibility to his confession and painted a much more serious picture of his involvement. He was not just a small-time dealer, he was a significant supplier in a drug trafficking operation. He even gave the detective financial details. He stated that a full kilo of cocaine cost $35,000. This specific number made his story more believable. It was not a vague guess, it was a hard fact from his own experience. He went on to explain that on the day he was taken into custody, he had fronted the drugs to Vale. This meant that Vale had taken the cocaine without paying for it up front, with the promise to pay later. This detail was crucial because it established the specifics of the most recent crime. It gave the police a concrete transaction to build their case upon, complete with names, amounts and financial terms. By providing these details, Benjamin was digging a deeper and deeper hole for himself. Each piece of information was another link in a chain that the police could use to tie him to the crime. He may have thought that being honest and cooperative was his ticket home, as the detective had promised, but in reality, every word he said was making it more and more likely that he would face serious criminal charges. He was giving the prosecution the exact evidence they would need to convict him. He had waived his right to remain silent, and in doing so, he had become the primary witness against himself.
We need to know more about Christopher Vale, Ben, and we also want to know who you got the cocaine from. Names, numbers, where you meet, that sort of thing. This isn't just about you.
It is important to understand why the detective was so focused on getting details about other people, especially Christopher Vale and Benjamin's own suppliers. Police investigations, particularly in drug cases, are often about climbing the ladder. The person they have in the interview room is often just one step on that ladder. Detectives are not just interested in arresting one person. Their goal is to dismantle the entire criminal organization. They want to identify and arrest the people above their suspect, the ones who are running the operation and supplying the drugs. Benjamin Conley was, in the eyes of the police, a middleman. The detective made it clear that the police were investigating Christopher Vale. This was likely the original target of their operation. They also told Benjamin that they were interested in the people who supplied him with the cocaine. This is the classic strategy. They use the person they have in custody as a source of intelligence. They want names, locations, phone numbers, and any other details that can lead them to bigger targets. Benjamin's confession about selling to Vale was valuable, but information about his suppliers would be even more valuable. It would allow the police to move up the supply chain and get closer to the top of the organization. The operation that led to Benjamin being taken into custody was pre-planned. This was not a random traffic stop. The police had likely been watching him or Vale for some time. They had a plan, and getting Benjamin to talk was a key part of that plan. His cooperation, they hoped, would save them months of difficult and dangerous surveillance work. A confession from an insider is a shortcut to building a bigger case. This is why detectives will often promise leniency or help in exchange for this kind of information. They are willing to trade a smaller fish for the chance to catch a much bigger one. For Benjamin, this meant he was a pawn in a much larger game. He may have seen the interview as being just about him and his own legal trouble, but for the detective, the interview was about the entire network. Benjamin's fear and his desire to go home were levers the detective could pull to get what he really wanted: information that would lead to more arrests. The detective's promises were not about helping Benjamin. They were about using Benjamin to achieve a larger law enforcement objective. It is a cold and calculated part of police work, where individuals can become tools in a broader investigation.
But you said I could go home if I told you everything. You said I wouldn't get charged.
The story of Benjamin Conley's interview serves as a powerful cautionary tale. Despite the detective's repeated promises that he would go home and not be charged, That is not what happened. After giving a full confession, providing details about his dealings with Christopher Vale, and explaining the scope of his operation, Benjamin was not released. He was arrested and charged with serious drug trafficking offences. The promises of freedom and secrecy, which had seemed so real and reassuring inside the interview room, vanished once the police had what they wanted. His words, which he hoped would set him free, were instead used to build the case that would take his freedom away. This outcome is not unusual. As mentioned before, police are often permitted to use deception during interrogations. The promises made by a detective are not legally binding contracts. They are a tactic, a tool used to encourage a confession. Once the confession is recorded, the reality of the situation sets in. The case is handed over to a prosecutor who looks at the evidence. A detailed, on-the-record confession is some of the strongest evidence a prosecutor can have. The prosecutor's job is to enforce the law, and they will almost always move forward with charges when they have such a solid case, regardless of what was promised in the interview room. The promise of confidentiality also proved to be empty. Benjamin's name did not remain a secret. In order for the police and prosecutors to use the information he provided against Christopher Vale or his suppliers, Benjamin would have to become a witness. His name would appear in official documents, and he might even have to testify in court. The idea that he could secretly help the police without anyone finding out was an illusion. Cooperation with law enforcement in a criminal case is almost never a secret. His confession made him a central figure in the investigation, and his identity was now a matter of public record. The lesson from Benjamin's experience is stark and clear. Promises made in an interrogation room should be treated with extreme skepticism. A detective's primary loyalty is not to the suspect but to the investigation. Their goal is to close the case and secure a conviction. While some officers may genuinely want to help a person who cooperates, the institutional pressures of the justice system often make that impossible. Benjamin Conley learned this lesson the hard way. He trusted the promises of a man whose job was to build a case against him, and in the end, he paid the price with his own liberty. The case of Benjamin Conley is a clear illustration of why understanding your rights is so important. The Miranda warning is not just a formality, it is your armor in a vulnerable situation. The right to remain silent is your most powerful defense. You are never obligated to answer a detective's questions. Saying "I want to remain silent" is a complete and valid response. It can be difficult to do this when you are under pressure, but it is a right you are guaranteed to have. Had Benjamin exercised this right, the outcome of his day might have been very different. The police would have had no confession to use against him. Similarly, the right to an attorney is a critical shield. A lawyer's job is to protect your interests. They understand the tactics police use and can advise you on how to navigate the situation safely. If Benjamin had said, "I want a lawyer," the interrogation would have had to stop immediately. The police could not have asked him any more questions until his lawyer was present. A lawyer would have likely advised him not to speak, or at the very least would have tried to negotiate a formal cooperation agreement with the prosecutor. Not just rely on the informal promises of a detective. A lawyer levels the playing field. Feeling nervous or scared in a police interview is normal. It is a high-stress environment designed to make you uncomfortable. This is why you should not rely on your own judgment in that moment. Your fear can cloud your thinking and make you vulnerable to persuasion and false promises. Knowing your rights ahead of time and having the resolve to use them is the best preparation. Think of it like a fire drill. You practice what to do before a fire ever happens, so you can act correctly without having to think when the emergency is real. Knowing to ask for a lawyer is the most important part of that drill. Ultimately, the justice system is complex. Police are doing their job, which is to investigate crimes, but you also have a job, which is to protect yourself. The story of Benjamin Conley is not about blaming the police. It is about empowering the citizen. It shows that cooperation based on verbal promises can lead to disastrous results. It teaches us that the rights read to you by the police are real and powerful tools. You have the right to be silent. You have the right to a lawyer. Knowing these rights and having the courage to use them is the best way to ensure that you are treated fairly and that your future is protected.